For those of you that don't know me or I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Cedric Lundy, and my family and I have been attending the Grove now for just over a year. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the Grove and that really appealed to us, it's diversity. And when I say diversity, I don't just mean racial and ethnic diversity, but I also mean intergenerational. Because in some crowds, if I was to reference what I'm about to reference, there would be a lot of people who would give me blank stares. But I trust that there's a good number of people in here who would share in the nostalgic moment of me acknowledging or referencing how back in the day, when there was pretty much only network TV or cable was limited to no more than 70 channels. Every Passover for 2 nights on TV, they would show Cecil B. DeMille's The 10 Commandments. See, I see the heads nodding already. Starring Charlton Heston as Moses. That every Passover, you could count on that movie being on 2 nights, because back then, 10 Commandments was 3 hours and 40 minutes long. It was long enough, right, that they actually worked the intermission into the film so that if you were seeing it at the movie theater, you actually knew when you could go get up and go pee. You didn't have to download the app Go Pee to know when is the best time to go see, use the bathroom while you're in the movie. If you didn't know that app exists, it does. And it's very helpful. But yes, we used to watch that movie every Passover. And now my memory of it isn't great. There's certain scenes that really stand out from that movie. I'm pretty sure I really didn't see the first half of the movie until much later on, but I can remember in particular the scenes that depicted the 10 plagues. And I can vividly remember the scene of them crossing the Reed Sea. And then, of course, the final climactic scene where God gives the 10 Commandments, and in the meanwhile, while Moses is up on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments, you had the people of Israel being led astray, demanding that Aaron make them a golden calf that they would worship. And that the primary character in the movie, who is the one convincing Aaron to do this, is a character whose name is Dathan. Now, I ended up seeing the movie in its entirety when I was in my late 20s. As a middle school youth pastor, I actually had the audacity to lead young people through the Old Testament. And yes, we even went through books like Numbers and Leviticus. And I trust you, because I'm sure you saw on the screen Numbers 16. It didn't even give a specific verse within Numbers 16. We're camping out in Numbers 16, to which many of you who've maybe done a year through the Bible, you're like, that's one of the most boring books in the Bible. Are we allowed to say that? Trust me, Numbers 16 is wild. That being said, I would spend time going through the Old Testament, and I thought a really cool way to kind of give some imagery to the Exodus story was to show clips of the 10 Commandments. So I bought the movie on DVD. And that's when, for the very first time, I actually saw the movie from start to finish without having to go to bed and watch it the next day. And so one of the things I realized while watching the movie, spoiler alert, is that Cecil B. DeMille took some artistic license. And that the movie doesn't follow along the biblical text to the letter. That he actually took some segments of the Exodus story and stayed pretty true to them. And then other areas, he maybe take other areas or stories from the Bible and merged it with parts that were happening in Exodus to create, possibly, I guess in his mind, a more entertaining movie. And what I discovered is that character Dathan, who really is beyond just Pharaoh himself, the heel in the movie. He's the main adversary against Moses in the movie, because he's the one that from the very start, he has been able to make a life for himself in Egypt despite being an Israelite. He's been able to profit by being in good standing with the powers that be. So he has zero interest in leaving Egypt to begin with. And from that time forward, all he ever does is oppose Moses, question Moses, but he's really sneaky and conniving about it the entire time. And of course, it hits that climax with the golden calf scene. All that being said, in the actual biblical text, we don't even meet Dathan until Numbers 16, where it is the story of Korah's rebellion. And it starts off like this. Now Korah, son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, along with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, descendants of Reuben. Trust me, it gets more exciting after it lists all the names. Took 250 Israelite men, leaders of the congregation, chosen from the assembly, well-known men. And they confronted Moses. They assembled against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far. All the congregation are holy, every one of them. And the Lord is among them." No argument with that. "So why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" When Moses heard it, he fell on his face. Now, just for a little bit of context, at this point, they've likely been in the wilderness on their journey for a little less than a year. And they've had to adjust to life on the road, so to speak, right? Because even when they were enslaved, there were certain things that they could count on, like having 3 square meals. Even if it wasn't the best of meals, they knew it was something they could count on. Whereas now they're having to depend on this weird bread that comes down from the heavens every morning and random like quail going through their camp and just happen to be, I always imagine when it talks about the quail being provided that it was like, you know, like the rotisserie chicken that you get at Harris Teeter. Because I'm guessing maybe they didn't have to chase it. I don't know. My imagination goes a little wild. But the point being is that God provided. Right? And yet, for many of them, it was not enough. They were not satisfied, and they missed certain things that they counted as a privilege, despite being enslaved in Egypt. So moving on, then he said to Korah and all his company, "In the morning the Lord will make known who is his and who is holy, and who will be allowed to approach him. The one whom he will choose, he will allow to approach him. Do this, take censers, Korah and all your company, and tomorrow put fire in them, and lay incense on them before the Lord, and the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the Holy One. You Levites have gone too far." Then Moses said to Korah, "Hear now, you Levites, is it too little for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to allow you to approach him in order to perform the duties of the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the congregation and serve them? He has allowed you to approach him and all your brother Levites with you, yet you seek the priesthood as well. Therefore, you and all your company have gathered together against the Lord. What is Aaron that you rail against him?" It's a little bit of further context which Moses gets into. He's in essence saying, look, when God gave us these instructions of how we were to set up the tabernacle, which was this big tent in the middle of their camp where the presence of God abided and took up residence amongst them, that you had the priesthood that did all the duties that would eventually be the duties of the priests in the temple. And amongst the priests, there was an elevated group of priests, which were the Levites. And they were ones that had even extra or special access and duties even amongst the Levites. So there was the priests, there is the Levites, and then there was the high priest Aaron and his sons. And yet here they are accusing Moses and Aaron of elevating themselves over and above the people. Some Bible scholars would suggest that part of their issue or their misunderstanding is that in Egypt, the priests that served the gods of Egypt were a very wealthy and elite class. That they were in a position where through religion, they were in a lot of ways able to exploit the people and gain profit and wealth for themselves and their family. And so it is perhaps that Korah was thinking that Moses and Aaron were basically setting up a system to replicate what they had seen in Egypt, which in a lot of ways, considering that they had spent 420 years there, makes sense that he is being informed by the only culture he has known of what he wants his legacy to look like. And he is not satisfied with being one of the Levites. He sees an opportunity to be at the very top. And so he gathers some people with him to make this claim and go after what it is that he wants to pursue. Not understanding that God is wanting to establish and create something completely different. As it has often been said, it took 4 months for God to get Israel out of Egypt, but it took God 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel. Yes. So moving on. Moses sent for Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, but they said, "We will not come. Is it too little that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey?" Yeah, he's talking about Egypt. "To kill us in the wilderness, that you must also lord it over us. It is clear you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey." Moses, you said this wasn't going to happen. This should be a 4-day journey, and we're stuck out here for months. "Or given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of these men as well? We will not come." Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, "Pay no attention to their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them. I have not exploited them in the least, and I have not harmed any one of them." And Moses said to Korah, "As for you and all your company, be present tomorrow before the Lord, you and they and Aaron, and let each one of you take his censer and put incense on it, and each one of you present his censer before the Lord, 250 censers. You also and Aaron each his censer. So each man take his censer, and they put fire in their censers and laid incense on them, and they stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. Then Korah assembled the whole congregation against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord appeared to the whole congregation." So for any of you that got lost in the number of times that I said censers, there's about to be a showdown in front of the tent of meeting. That each one of these men, Korah and the 250 men that are rebelling, they're in essence supposed to get their staff, which had this kind of candle or lantern on it that they lit, and they offered fire or incense to the Lord. And whoever the Lord chose was his, quote, holy one, or the one who would serve as the priest before all the people. So here you have the 250 men in Korah standing on one side. You got Moses and Aaron on one side. In the middle, you have the tent of meeting with the pillar of fire and cloud that the glory of God was shrouded in before the tent of meeting. And out watching was probably the largest crowd you've ever seen, because there's something like hundreds of thousands of Israelites. So, Jerry Jones and Jerry World, eat your heart out. And even my beloved Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where my University of Michigan football team, the highest capacity football stadium in the United States of America, mind you, ain't got nothing on this crowd. That being said, it's about to get wild. So they light their censers, they go before the Lord, and here's what happens. "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, say to the congregation, get away from the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." God ain't playing. So Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and elders of Israel followed him. And he said to the congregation, turn away from the tents of these wicked men and touch nothing of theirs, or you will be swept away for all their sins. Like, that's pretty drastic. Like, don't even touch anything of theirs. Don't don't even stand next to their car. Well, it's probably not a car, chariot, horse, I don't know. Anyway, just don't come near any one of their possessions. So they got away from their dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the entrance of their tents, together with their wives, their children, and their little ones. And Moses said, this is how you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works. It has not been of my own accord. If these people die a natural death, this is where it gets interesting, or if a natural fate comes to them, I don't know, they catch a cold and die, then the Lord has not sent me. They die of natural causes, call me a liar. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you shall know that these men have despised the Lord. Now, those of you that have seen the Ten Commandments movie by Cecil B. DeMille have started doing the math in your head, right? Because that story in the Bible, what happens is when Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments on the tablets and he sees the people worshiping the golden calf, Moses, who's like 80 some odd years old, according to scripture, goes full tilt. Right? He absolutely loses it and is a raging inferno, breaks the tablets, melts down and pounds into powder the golden calf, and forces the people to drink the gold dust out of the stream. That's not what happens in the movie. What Cecil B. DeMille did is he took his creative license and basically implanted this something new where, the earth opens up, swallows them whole with all their belongings. Because in the movie, Moses takes the 10 Commandments, throws them at the golden calf, it explodes, the earth cracks, and Dathan and all of the people who stood with Dathan go down into the pit. Verse 31, as soon as he finished speaking all these words, the ground under them was split apart. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up along with their households and everyone who belonged to Korah and all their goods. So with all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol. The earth closed over them and they perished from the midst of the assembly. All Israel around them fled at their outcry, for they said, the earth will swallow us too. And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering incense. The Lord wasn't playing. That is a wild, wild story. We have the earth splitting apart, swallowing people whole, and basically God becoming a blowtorch and taking out 250 men who had rebelled. And now this is Korah's legacy. This is Dathan's legacy. This is Abiram's legacy, that they take up or they consume an entire chapter in the Bible where their desire for more than what had been apportioned to them led them to rebel against the Lord, against the Lord's anointed in Moses and Aaron, and gives us this story that serves perhaps as a warning. In a lot of ways, things haven't changed that much in today's world. We are often prompted to pursue a legacy that is dominated by success, promotions. It's even gotten to the point where we can't even have good hobbies without being expected to turn them into a side hustle. Nowadays, our kids, what are you doing if you haven't started a YouTube channel or you don't have so many followers on Instagram, TikTok, and guess who they are inheriting that mentality from? The adults. When I think of legacy, though, I think of folks like my father. My father graduated from high school, and he never got more than an associate's degree from college. He grew up in a time when you could basically get a job at a factory and you could provide for your family good and well with that for basically the rest of your vocational career. And so a month from turning 18, my dad got a job at the Sheldon Road Ford plant, just outside of Ann Arbor in Detroit, Michigan, smack dab in the middle. And my dad ended up working at that Ford plant for 35 years. But near the end of his time there, if you've done the math, he was only 52 years old. He retired from Ford in 2005 because if you recall, that was only 3 years before the economic crash and the recession, and the auto industry was a big part of that story. Well, Ford actually saw the writing on the wall. If you recall, they're the only one of the big four that did not take government bailout money. Instead, what they did is they started to lay off or terminate the employment of many of the men working at the plant. My father was one whom, because he had already worked 35 years, he was making a good amount of money that guys that had been hired there in the last 20 years of his 35 were never going to see. And so it created a lot of tension in that plant. And so they went to guys like my father and said, hey, if you retire now, instead of having to wait another 6 years, we'll give you your full pension now. Originally, they offered to move him to a plant somewhere down south, which he passed because my mom works at University of Michigan Medical Center, and she has a really good job there where she can't just move. So he decided to stay there. And so he decided to retire. And when they accepted his retirement, he said, hey, I want to continue working. Can you write a reference for me to, get another job? And so when they wrote the reference, one of the things that they said about my father, and they recognized about my father, is here was a man who, despite never having more than a high school degree and associate's degree, that he had the skill set, despite working on the line, he had the skill set of one of their trained engineers. That he was actually more efficient than their trained engineers in repairing the machinery on the line. He inherited that legacy from his father, who, if it hadn't have been for his smoking and emphysema, we were convinced was going to die with his head in the hood of a car, because he was always working on a truck or a car. And so my dad intuitively has always understood how engines and machinery works. And despite not having the title of being an engineer, if they were on the line and one of those machines stopped working and there wasn't an engineer around, instead of saying, that's not my job or not my responsibility, my dad would take a look at it and fix it. And they said oftentimes when he was the one fixing it, it didn't break down as soon as the engineers who were doing it by the book. But moreover, my dad also had the unique ability to both communicate with blue collar and white collar. So after forcing retirement on him, they turned around and offered him a salary position as an engineer. When I think of legacy, I think of my father-in-law, who this summer was determined at 79 years old, he was going to ride the 12-mile circuit around this little island called Millport that he went to as a teenage boy, that he was going to ride this circuit with his granddaughter. He was absolutely determined because that's part of his legacy and wanting to experience that with his granddaughter. Those are the things I think of when I think of a legacy. So this morning, I don't really have like a, quote, application for you, but more of a question. As you sit here and you think of your own legacy, is your understanding of legacy oriented around the idea that this life is all you have? Or is your understanding of legacy oriented around this life is only the beginning? Oftentimes, if you're like me and you grew up in the church, this life is in a lot of ways all that we have, or it really doesn't matter, because then we're going to go on to heaven and worship God forever. And in a lot of ways, what was missing from that is this piece for me, that understanding that my legacy isn't just whatever I accomplish in this life, that the next life is actually a continuation of this one. That we don't just live in this eternal worship service, but we live in God's good, redeemed world, continuing to cultivate and create good things to fill the heavens and the earth that are united together once again like it was in the beginning. And the second question or thing to consider is, the legacy you pursue as a reflection of your core values. Growing up or working like it hasn't been that long, working as a pastor, as a vocational pastor, a lot of the times when I looked at maybe a church or considered the church that I was a part of or the denomination that I was a part of, the thing that oftentimes shaped or dictated whether or not I could be a part of that community, right, was things like doctrine statements and statements of belief, statements of faith, what we believe. And let me just say, those things in and of themselves aren't bad things. But one of the things that I've come to realize as I've worked with the nonprofit Urban Promise Charlotte that I work with, and Will also has the privilege of working with as well, is that we are guided by our core values. Things like excellence, autonomy, mutual vulnerability, Christian character. And over the last few years, I've really wrestled with some of the things that Will also spoke to about the divisions, in particular as a pastor. Pastors who pursue legacy that's all about how many followers, how big they can create their kingdom or their little empires. That in a lot of ways, the shape of pastoral ministry is changing, and that the pastors who just really truly care for and shepherd the flock are often doing great and excellent things, largely anonymous, because they're not the ones being offered book deals or being told how they can get more followers on their social media. But even more than that, how the church in a lot of ways, and I'm meaning just even nationally, how you can get so many bad apples in pastoral ministry. And this is the thing I started to realize. It's because the focus has been on believing the right things, having the right statement of faith or doctrinal beliefs, and you can be a jerk as long as you believe the right things. However, what about those core values? If those values of the kind of people that we're leading were different, and that was maybe the focus, we wouldn't have so many wolves running amok amongst the sheep. All that being said, the legacy you pursue is a reflection of your core values. And that's why I look to folks like my father or my father-in-law as great examples of legacy. Because they're both really talented men who could have done some really great things. Heck, my dad, here I go bragging about my dad, his birthday was just a couple of weeks ago. My dad was an excellent bowler. My dad when he was done bowling, his average was 220. He had actually, and I didn't even know this, I found this out from my grandmother, he actually got offered endorsements to go on the PBA. He was that good. And when I asked him about it, I'm like, number one, why have you never shared this information? And number two, why did you choose not to take advantage of it? He said, because I would have been on the road all the time and I wouldn't have been able to be with family and go golfing with your mother and things of that nature. My father-in-law, he got a degree in religion. He's an excellent pastor, preacher. But he wanted to be a teacher. And he's passed that legacy down to his daughter. Happy birthday. It's her birthday today. All that being said, the last thing I want to leave you all with to think about or consider is this. We have a God that the legacy of our God in comparison to all the different mythologies of gods established a legacy in solidarity with humanity and did not hold all of his divine rights and privileges something to be grasped, but took on human form to live and dwell amongst us. And a lot of times that has led to all kinds of different things like theories of atonement, right? Which aren't bad things, but oftentimes what we lose the focus on is that God coming in flesh in the form of Jesus Christ is an affirmation of who you are in your humanity, that we don't have to chase a legacy, but that we get to just be fully human, living in community with one another and enjoying God's good world. So the Grove, as we go into our day, as we go into our week, for many of us, the last week before school begins, and we get back on that wheel. What is the legacy that you will pursue?